Hello there, and welcome to this Joy Sightings edition number 35. Today I read the next to the last chapter, chapter 11, in Tales of the Resistance by David and Karen Maines. The chapter is entitled Traffic Court. Traffic Court was in the very middle of the hold of the Dagoda. Here the people of the city were tried for minor and major traffic offenses, crossing streets at night during a power out, impeding the progress of the enchanter's limousines, failing to yield to emergency vehicles, walking instead of riding when the man-made power was working. But the charge made no difference in this courtroom of the enchanter. No one was ever declared innocent. Amanda stood trembling in a darkened corner of Traffic Court. She couldn't help herself. She had never felt the tremendous power of evil so forcefully. She had to labor to catch a breath, as though in this stronghold of the fire wizard, air smothered her lungs. The evil power made her shoulders ache. It pressed against the backs of her eyes, pushed hard against her stomach. She needed all the strength she could muster to withstand its insistent oppression. The king had been captured the night before, after leading the sad and sorrowful great celebration. He had been charged with a felony, organizing the taxi resistance, with high treason in proclaiming another kingdom, with heinous insurrection, pretending to be the king. All charges bore the penalty of death by burning at Burning Place. Amanda drew another deep breath, struggling to fill her lungs. Around the courtroom, iron braziers held burning coals that emitted a red and eerie glow. The benches began to fill with street people. The chief herald of the enchanter shuffled papers on the judge's dais. He tested his proclamation horn. Surviving members of the underground taxi resistance had decided it was unwise for the keeper of the Chronicle of the Sightings of the King to attend this trial. Hero had attracted the attention of the enchanter's eye all too often. His scar, as well as his tendency to take bold action, made him conspicuous. So Amanda, with her quiet gifts of seeing and aiming, was chosen to walk alone through the gates of the enchanter's palace and simply to observe the proceedings. She was pledged to take no action on the king's behalf. It would be foolish. Most felt he was a dead man already. There was no use risking 2 lives, and maybe all the lives of those in the resistance, if she should behave unwisely. The courtroom was now full. The clerk of Traffic Court entered and banged the gavel. Sparks flew as though iron and flint had been struck. "All rise," he cried. Hear ye, the Traffic Court of the Enchanter in the keep of the Grand Dagoda is now in session." All the street people, family members and friends of the accused, struggled to their feet, the great weight of dark oppression crushing their shoulders. They all knew the traffic charge made no difference. Whether they had committed major or minor offenses or were wrongfully accused, they paid exorbitant fines. They forfeited lands and goods. They were condemned to hard labor. They were proclaimed unworthy parents and had their children sentenced to the orphan keeper. All were judged guilty. The chief herald blew his horn, and the song of the naysayers began. Marching feet signaled the presence of the guard of burners and breakers. Soon these surrounded the edge of the courtroom. The death drums sounded, din, 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 din. Then suddenly the room was filled with a fiery light as the enchanter himself made his entrance to be the judge of tonight's trials. Amanda felt despair, whip-like, lash itself around her heart. She had never known evil so real. It breathed. It sang terrible melodies. It dug fangs into her spirit and injected her with a venom, poisonous, rank, life-threatening. The enchanter's cloak was like warm fire on the hearth. It glowed and curled, inviting and mesmerizing. But his eyes were malevolent, filled with yellow light and gleeful, exultant, triumphant. The prisoners, doleful and miserable, were brought to the dock. Guards handled them roughly, pushing and shoving them into place. Amanda leaned closer. "Which is the king?" She couldn't find him. Had he been tortured like Big Operator without sentencing? "Quiet in the courtroom," announced the clerk, striking the iron gavel on its flint pad. The enchanter had slipped into the black robes of a judge, and now, in the dim light of the burning charcoal pots, he rose to make judgment. Was there to be no hearing for these poor people? What was the outlandish penalty for jaywalking, for shoving one's cart too close to the enchanter's limousine? Was there to be no defense for these? No judge who would suspend sentence, say, "not guilty"? And where was the king? The enchanter lifted his hands, small sparks of light scattered from the movement. He said, "My judgment is that you are all guilty." The people moaned and hung their heads in hopeless resignation. "By rights you should be sentenced to burning, to forced labor, to the yielding of lands and possessions. But tonight is a night of celebration. The treasonous traitor has been captured. The one who has trafficked against my rules has been taken into my custody. In light of this, my pronouncement is that all sentences should be reprieved. All the guilty in this courtroom shall be freed. There will only be one death tonight." With this announcement, the death drums quickened their rhythm. Din, 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 din. The prisoners stood in amazement. Such a thing had never happened in the history of Enchanted City. The guards unlocked wrist and leg bands. A woman reached toward the docket for her son. The clerk blew his trumpet as breakers dispersed the amazed captives, who took the benches and the back walls, since all doors but one were barred and locked. "Bring the miscreant forth!" Amanda gasped. A man, most unlike the king, was dragged through the side door which led up from the dungeons. This was a disguise, if it was he, more than a disguise of apparel or of wearing of common garments. It was a disguise of feature and form, of spirit and soul. The girl crept from her darkened corner and found a crowded space near an aisle in order to see. Burners prodded him with their hot pokers. Breakers butted him with their cruel cudgels. Quietly, the man lifted his eyes and looked at the crowd in the courtroom. In that fleeting moment, Amanda recognized the look of her lord the king. She thought, "The names! To His Majesty, my sovereign liege!" She began, but the names, once so full of power, dropped in her thoughts like false coins, tin, falling weightless on measuring scales. She thought, "The music!" But not one tune of Great Park could she remember. Though she had danced in the great celebration the night before, she couldn't recall one note. She was powerless. What's more, the king was powerless. Amanda wanted to scream, "Do something to save yourself! You are the king, the real king!" The enchanter leered, the yellow light in his eyes glowing. Amanda had seen that look before. That dragon play of the powerful sorcerer baiting a helpless victim before striking the death blow. The fire wizard leaned closer. "So," he said, and his voice was treacherous, "so you are the true king, and there is another kingdom." He beat his long fingers on the surface of the bench, raised an eyebrow, and smiled menacingly. The man on trial answered not a word. He hung his head and refused to meet the enchanter's gaze. This silence angered his accuser, who struggled to contain his growing wrath. "So," said the enchanter, his voice rising, "so you dare to challenge my dominion. You dare to raise insurrection and cause traffic jams in the streets. The chief of the taxi resistance is dead. But you are its reason. You are its inspiration. Death to pretenders." The courtroom grew warmer. Amanda felt as though her limbs were tied. Her heart throbbed painfully, beaten with the stick of terror. She felt faint and unbuttoned her warm vest. Then she realized she was conspicuously humming the song of the naysayers. "Nay, nay, 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 nothing can be done, nothing will be done, nothing is being done." "Oh, mercy," she cried in her heart. "Oh, caretaker, help me. The king is ruined. We are all ruined." "First witness," cried the clerk. It was the chief herald, the one formerly known as Doublespeak. His friends said that he was Doublespeak no more, but Doomster, the one who pronounced judgment for the enchanter. The emblem of the fire wizard was emblazoned on his elegant purple jersey. He wore brass armbands and a circlet of gold upon his head. "Why, I heard with my very own ears this man, this prisoner here, proclaim another kingdom, where the subjects live in the light. He attempted to entice me, the chief herald to the enchanter, to treason." Someone in the courtroom called out, "Treachery!" Another shouted, "Death to pretenders!" The clerk banged his gavel for order. The man in the center of the courtroom spoke not a word. Amanda studied him carefully. His shoulders sagged as though he was suffering great sorrow. He seemed drawn within himself. The proceedings in that place made no difference. It was as though he had walked into a great aloneness and was not even present. "Seeing," thought Amanda. If she could see into the king's mind. Closing her eyes, Amanda aimed her gifts at the great soul of the man standing in disguise before her. A wave of enormous sadness overcame her. Tears began to stream down her cheeks as she was tempted to withdraw her sight. "Nay, nay, nay," intoned the Song of Doom. The king's mind was entering into every dark place in Enchanted City. No, more, taking all the darkness into his very center. Amanda could see nothing. The dark blindness overwhelmed her, but somehow she realized that her sight labored by the side of her dear king, the one she loved most in all the world. "My liege lord," she whispered in her heart, and the man in front of her stirred slightly, as though he had heard and recognized her words with his own soul. It was then that Amanda realized that nothing could be done, that for now there was no light in the king, that he had, for some reason of his own knowing, joined with this deeper and most impenetrable darkness. Through him, Amanda stared into the shadow of death itself, into the night of all nights that begins and has no ending, and she withdrew, opening her eyes, unable to bear any more of the grimacing features of total despair. It was then that she saw them, circling the rim of the courtyard, standing beyond and above and over the burners and breakers, gorgeous, brilliant, shining, the bright ones. They were translucent, shimmering. As Amanda glanced quickly at the miserable creatures sitting on the benches, cold, shivering with fear, hopeless, glad for one wretched moment of reprieve at the expense of the most beautiful man who ever lived, the princess realized that no one else was aware of these creatures of indescribable glory. Unknowingly, they were all surrounded by these exquisite, unseen beings who glistened like raindrops on cobwebs blown by the wind, who turned like gossamer milk-pod seeds in the brilliant sunlight, who raised their eyes filled with star glory and stretched their wings tip to tip, now gold, now silver, now pure light on light. The bright ones bent their graces toward the man in the center of this trial, preventing any interruption of purpose from breaking his intense concentration. Their looks focused on the king in the center, holding off tenderness, staying any loving kindness, lest goodness distract him from the work of breaking the enchanter's spell, which held all the city in its grip. They were not helping him. They were only keeping him from being interrupted. Amanda could see that they too wept. The princess turned her moist and opened eyes to the king. Now she understood that he was deliberately restraining his own power. He was not defeated by the gathering evil oppression in the hold of the fire wizard. The king was holding himself in, containing command and nobility, silencing his majestic authority, confining his royalty in order to descend by the way of mind and spirit into the center of dark agony, the very secret evil crux of the enchanter's domain. He was preparing himself to be the willing victim who would lift the enchantment from the city. It was then Amanda realized that the trial had gone on, that other witnesses had been called, that now the courtroom was a chaos of noise. "Burn him! Burn him!" the people screamed. "Death to the pretender!" pronounced the chief herald. "To the burning place!" screamed the enchanter, and the iron cauldrons flared orange at the pronouncement of sentence. The death drums rolled, the pokers of the burners glowed, the fire wizard removed his black robe of condemnation, the gavel pounded, raising sparks. Amanda's heart broke at this judgment, and she sobbed aloud, no longer hiding herself. For once it made no matter, for the evil eye sought only one victim, one sacrificial captive, and that one remained still, silent in the rising riot as the enchanter began the procession of death. So the enchanter's men came a last time, and took into custody the one who could walk into the center of madness, who could make his way into the underworld of each child's life, whose very name freed the prisoner, whose promise of a kingdom made life worth playing, who brought light into all dark places. The one who could sing the whole song, who could call each orphan by name, the only one who could stare the enchanter in the eye, who could challenge the very dominion of evil, the one who begins the dance of celebration again at life's end, the King, the true King.